In a number of history and geography textbooks written in early times, it is written that Mungo Park discovered the river Niger. For generations, this is the story Nigerian children grew up hearing. In classrooms, in textbooks, and even in nursery rhymes. It sounded noble and even magical. A brave white man sailing through unknown jungles, battling wild rivers and fierce tribes, finally uncovering a great waterway no one had ever seen before. But as you grow older, you begin to wonder, how can you discover something that was already in place? How can a man from Scotland discover a river that millions of Africans had fished from, farmed beside, traded across, and worshipped its goddess for centuries? This is the myth many of us were taught, the myth of the benevolent explorer, the civilizing hero who, quote, brought Africa into history and put Africa on the map. This story was the bedrock of a colonial education designed to place the European at the center of the world. But here is the unfiltered truth. Africa did not need to be discovered. It only needed to be acknowledged. The river Niger, that vast winding body of water stretching over 4,180 kilometers, was never a mystery to the people that lived by the river. Gao, Timbuktu, Nupe, Lokoja, and a number of other communities lived by the river for centuries. These are generations that had already mapped the mood of the river. They named the river, they respected the river, and they feared it. They even worshipped the goddess of the river. Yet, when the European explorers arrived, Africa's story was suddenly rewritten. Suddenly, the continent became a blank map, its people reduced to shadows, and sometimes reduced to nothing. Their knowledge was dismissed as myth, their civilization ignored. And as for Mungo Park, all of a sudden he became a symbol painted as the man who, quote, brought light to the dark continent of Africa. But was that really what happened? Because when you peel back the layers of legend, we find not a discovery but a mission, an agenda, a myth built to serve an empire. Before he became a legend in Nigerian classrooms, Mungo Park was simply a young Scottish medical doctor, curious, ambitious, and restless. He was born in 1771 in a small village near Selkirk, Scotland. And that's exactly where his story begins. In 1795, Mungo Park was chosen by the African Association, a powerful British group founded in London in 1788. Its mission was to explore the interior of Africa, but not out of pure curiosity. At the time, the British Empire wanted to dominate trade across the continent. They sought gold, they sought spices, ivory, and above all, they sought new routes to the rich markets of the interior of Africa. Africa was still largely unknown to European maps, and the biggest mystery of all was the river Niger. Where did it start, they ask, and where did it end? Specifically, the association hoped that the river flowed to the Nile or offered a massive navigable highway to the Atlantic by passing existing coastal trade monopolies. To Britain, solving that mystery meant unlocking a highway for imperial expansion. So when Mungo Park volunteered, he wasn't sent to discover people. He was sent to chart their resources. He was an explorer, yes, but also a surveyor for the empire. In 1795, he set off from the Gambia River, armed with little more than a compass, a few trade goods, and a conviction that he was walking into the unknown. After months of hardship, near death, and encounters with local kingdoms, he finally reached the great river at Segou in present-day Mali. He wrote in his journal, "I saw with infinite pleasure the great object of my mission, the long sought for majestic river flowing eastward." End of quote. That single line would immortalize his name. To Europe, he had discovered the Niger, but to the Africans who guided him there, who had lived on the banks of the river for centuries, he had simply arrived late. Mungo Park returned to Britain a hero. His book, Travels in the Interior Districts of Africa, 1799, became a bestseller. It painted vivid images of Africa, beautiful, dangerous, exotic, a place that needed European, quote, order and civilization. His fame ignited a new wave of explorers, missionaries, and soldiers who followed in his footsteps. But his curiosity also became his undoing. In 1805, on his second expedition, Mungo Park set out again, this time with 40 men, boats, and guns, determined to trace the Niger to its very end. Only one of his crew survived. Mungo Park drowned near the Bassa Rapids in present-day Kainji Lake area, Nigeria, never realizing that the river he followed would one day bear his name in school books across the country. Yet the real question remains, was Mungo Park really a discoverer? Because by the time he arrived, the Niger was no mystery to Africans. The kingdoms around it had already built their civilizations upon it. And long before Mungo Park ever set foot on the continent of Africa, African scholars, travelers, and traders had already mapped the river's course through knowledge passed down over centuries. Here is the truth they don't teach in school. The world they discover wasn't innocent. It was a weapon, a linguistic tool designed to erase, to overwrite, and to justify. When Europeans said Mungo Park discovered the river Niger, they weren't describing a new finding, they were rebranding ownership. It was always about power and never really about geography. By the late 18th century, Europe had already begun what historians now call the age of scientific imperialism, a period when maps became tools of conquest. To claim a river was to claim the lands around it. To discover a people was to declare that, before your arrival, they did not count. And so when Mungo Park returned to London in 1797 with sketches and stories of the Niger, the British press did not ask who lives there. They asked, what can we gain? Long before Mungo Park's arrival, Africans already had deep relationships with the Niger. The river had many names: Jeliba or Joliba to the Mandinka, meaning big river; Isabia to the Songhai, meaning the great river; Kora to the Hausa, and names like Orimiri to the Igbos, meaning the great river, demonstrating local ownership. It carried trade, ideas, culture, and faith from one civilization to another. The empires of Mali, Songhai, and Gao thrived because of it. They built irrigation systems, controlled fishing routes, and taxed commerce centuries before Mungo Park was born. So when Britain said that Mungo Park discovered the Niger, what they really meant was that Europe had just found something useful to itself. The myth of discovery became a blueprint. Centuries before Mungo Park ever stepped his foot on African soil, the Niger River was already known, mapped, and navigated by Africans themselves. It was not an unknown mystery waiting for a European to stumble upon. It was the lifeblood of civilizations. West Africa had its own geographers and chroniclers. Abu Abdullah al-Bakri, 11th century, a Muslim scholar from Spain, al-Bakri documented the kingdoms along the Niger, including Ghana and Mali. His writings described trade networks, agricultural practices, and the river's course in great detail. Ibn Battuta, 14th century, the famous Moroccan traveler, visited the Mali Empire and provided detailed accounts of cities along the Niger, river traffic, and regional customs. Leo Africanus, 16th century, in his description of Africa, he described River Niger's importance to commerce and culture, centuries before Mungo Park's map reached Europe. These accounts show that the Niger was far from undiscovered. It had already been mapped, measured, and named by generations of Africans. Beyond scholars, local communities, fishermen, traders, and riverine towns had intimate knowledge of the river. They knew its seasonal floods, navigable channels, and fishing grounds. Trading networks stretched from Timbuktu to the Atlantic coast, transporting gold, salt, kola nuts, and slaves long before Europeans arrived. Oral traditions preserved the river's geography for centuries, often using songs, stories, and rituals to pass knowledge from one generation to the other. In short, Mungo Park did not discover Nigeria, nor did he discover the Niger. He only made it known to Europeans. So if Africans already knew the river Niger, why did Europe insist that Mungo Park discovered it? The answer lies in power, profits, and propaganda. Europeans in the 18th and 19th century were not exploring Africa for curiosity alone. They were exploring it for resources, trade, and empire. By framing Mungo Park as a heroic discoverer, Britain could claim ownership over knowledge. Maps and journals gave European powers a right to intervene, justify colonization, portraying Africa as dark, unknown, and empty, made conquest appear noble rather than exploitative, control the narrative. The story of a lone European braving the wild erased the centuries of African expertise, sophistication, and civilization. A more accurate perspective is this: Mungo Park revealed the Niger to Europe, but he did not discover it. He was a visitor in a land already known, mapped, and governed by its people. The river and its civilizations existed independently of European recognition. By reclaiming this story, Nigeria and Africa at large can teach a more honest history, to wit, one where Africans are not invisible, one where knowledge and discovery are not measured by European eyes alone, one where pride, agency, and history are restored to the people who lived it first. Because Mungo Park didn't discover Nigeria, he discovered what Europe wanted to believe, that Africa was waiting for someone else to tell its story. But the truth remains that the story of Africa has been told by Africans for centuries upon centuries, even before the arrival of the Europeans. Thanks for watching this edition of Back in History, and do remember to subscribe to the channel or follow the page for regular notification on every new video. I am your host and friend Ekemi Nudim, wishing you the best of time in all you do.